Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and it is as follows. Recently, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas of the Fatah Party swore in a unity government consisting of his own Fatah Party as well as the Palestinian faction Hamas, who rules in the Gaza Strip. Ministers in the new administration, whom Abbas has said would be politically unaffiliated, took the oath of office in a televised ceremony in Ramallah. Abbas said that the new cabinet is made up of apolitical technocrats who have no ties to Hamas. Hamas, which remains sworn to Israel's destruction, has agreed to support the government from the outside. The swearing in of the unity government appeared to mark a significant step in repairing ties between the rival Palestinian factions, which have been at odds since 2007 when Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip from Fatah. The signing ceremony came after Hamas and Fatah signed a reconciliation deal in April to form the transitional government, which is now slated to pave the way for general elections in late 2014 or early 2015. Today, after announcing the government of national unity, we declare the end of division that caused catastrophic harm to our cause, Abbas said. At the inauguration ceremony, Abbas said that the new government would abide by commitments made by previous Palestinian administrations and by agreements ratified by the umbrella Palestinian Liberation Organization, a reference to the 1993 Oslo Accord signed with Israel. Abbas has insisted that any unity government would be based on what he calls the four Palestinian principles of recognizing Israel, recognizing the terms of international agreements, and the explicit rejection of violence and terrorism. However, Hamas continues to be adamant over its full control of a unity government, expressing over and over again that it would remain control in both the Gaza and in the Palestinian Authority after elections, and insisting that Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh would rule the government. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, the outgoing Palestinian prime minister in the Gaza Strip, said in a speech in the enclave that it was a historical day that closed a chapter of 7 years of division between Hamas and Fatah. But in his address, Haniyeh spoke of pursuing resistance by all forms, in apparent reference to actions that include armed conflict with Israel, and he said that the unity deal meant that Hamas's militia, the Qassam brigades, became an army today. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded by saying that Abbas today said yes to terror and no to peace. Even if we return to 1967 borders and dismantle all the settlements, the conflict with the Palestinians will not end, because the root of the conflict is in their unwillingness to recognize the Jewish nation-state, Netanyahu said. Upon the announcement of the Palestinian Unity Agreement, Netanyahu called an emergency cabinet meeting. During the cabinet meeting, the ministers agreed to completely halt negotiations with the Palestinian Authority as long as it remains united with the terror organization Hamas, and to lower the amount of money transferred to the Palestinians on a monthly basis. The cabinet said it would hold the new Palestinian government responsible for actions that harm Israel's security, including rockets aimed at Israeli residents in the south launched from the Gaza Strip. The cabinet also agreed to give Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu authority to impose sanctions against the Palestinian government. Meanwhile, the international community embraced the Palestinian Unity Government. A United Nations spokesman said that he welcomed the new Palestinian Unity Government and said the United Nations was ready to lend its full support to efforts to reunite the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The European Union said that it will work with the new Palestinian Unity Government also. We welcome the declaration by President Abbas that this new government is committed to the principles of the two-state solution based on 1967 borders, to the recognition of Israel's legitimate right to exist, the EU said in a statement. British Foreign Secretary William Hague welcomed the Palestinian Unity Agreement by saying, reuniting the Gaza Strip and the West Bank under a government committed to peace is a necessary condition for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. China also said it welcomed the new Palestinian unity government. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Li said, China welcomes the Palestinians forming a unity government, realizing internal reconciliation is conducive to Palestinian internal solidarity and is also conducive to the Palestinians pushing forward peace talks with Israel. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded by warning Europe against making the mistake of granting legitimacy to the newly united Fatah-Hamas government. Netanyahu appealed to French President François Hollande in a phone call saying the Palestinian unity government demonstrated a Palestinian step against peace and in favor of terrorism, as Israel views Hamas as a terror organization intent on the destruction of the Jewish state. The premier added that no European country would be prepared to accept a terrorist organization as part of its government and therefore should not acknowledge a Palestinian government backed by Hamas. The United States said that it would work with the Palestinian Arab Unity Government and maintain aid while watching closely to ensure it respects the principles of nonviolence. U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said that the United States believes that Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas has formed an interim technocratic government that does not include members affiliated with Hamas. From what we now know, we will work with this government, Psaki said. She said the Obama administration has no intention of cutting off financial aid to the Palestinian Authority, which amounts to roughly $500 million a year. Necessary funding for the cash-strapped organization. The ministers in the interim Palestinian government appear to be technocratic, she said, adding that the U.S. will be judging this government by its actions. We will continue to evaluate the composition of policies of the new government, and if needed, we will recalibrate our approach. Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah called U.S. recognition of a new Palestinian unity government encouraging. Israel's intelligence minister Yuval Steinitz said that the notion that the new cabinet was made up of technocrats rather than politicians, something that made it diplomatically easier for the West to deal with, was completely bogus. You cannot present it internally as a Hamas government and present it on the outside as a technocratic government, Steinitz said. Israel Deputy Minister of Defense Danny Danon said that the U.S. Congress should cut aid to the Palestinians upon the formation of a unity government with Hamas. Danon said that the U.S. government's decision to recognize such a government was a moral dilemma. You cannot play a game with this, the same way you cannot hide the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization, Danon said. You look at the wording of the U.S. law. It says it's not a Hamas appointment, but the involvement of Hamas. And it's a moral decision today that the U.S. administration has to make, whether they believe that the unity government is bad and whether they will follow the law. Very clearly, Danon added, the U.S. appropriation law from the U.S. Congress stipulates that if there is a unity government with Hamas, no funding shall be transferred to the Palestinian Authority. Head of the Fatah reconciliation team, Hassam al-Ahmad, said the United States administration has renounced its previous disapproval of the National Unity Government and will now support the new government. In addition, a senior Palestinian Authority official reportedly announced that the United States has invited the new Palestinian Unity Government's Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah to an official visit to the United States sometime in June, where he will meet with Obama and visit the U.S. Congress. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he is deeply troubled by the United States' decision to maintain relations with the new Palestinian Unity Government, urging the United States to tell the Palestinian president that his alliance with the Hamas military group is unacceptable. I'm deeply troubled by the announcement that the United States will work with the Palestinian government backed by Hamas, Netanyahu said, saying Hamas has murdered countless innocent civilians. All those who genuinely seek peace must reject President Abbas's embrace of Hamas, and most especially, I think the United States must make it absolutely clear to the Palestinian president that his agreement with Hamas, a terror organization that seeks Israel's liquidation, is simply unacceptable, Netanyahu said. Israel Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon said that he was skeptical of the recent Hamas-Fatah Palestinian Unity Government, stating that the new unity government would not contribute to the cause of peace, as some have suggested. He said that there is a 0% chance that Hamas will accept accept the quartet conditions, which includes the recognition of Israel. He predicted that the likely result of the unity deal is not that the Palestinian Authority will gain control of Gaza, but rather that Hamas will gain control of the West Bank, turning the West Bank into a security threat similar to that of the Gaza. Ya'alon argued more generally that the land for peace paradigm for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been a mistake, which has brought Israel only terror and rockets in exchange for territorial concessions. Ya'alon said that history has proven that the root of the conflict is not Israel's presence over the pre-1967 lines, but rather the refusal of the Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to exist. He noted that in every attempt to solve the conflict, including the recent failed negotiations, the Palestinians had refused to recognize Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, had refused to give up the right of return, and had refused to agree that a peace deal would put an end to all future Palestinian claims. Israel's ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, condemned the U.S. State Department for its decision to continue to uphold ties with the Palestinian Authority following the swearing in of the Fatah-Hamas unity government. Hamas hasn't changed. It remains as committed to Israel's destruction today as it was yesterday, Dermer said. He charged that the technocratic heads of the new Palestinian unity government were just posing to front the body backed by terrorists, and that the government should be recognized as such. With suits in the front office and terrorists in the back office, it should not be business as usual, he said. By accepting the Palestinian Unity government, other Israeli officials said the United States had sanctioned terrorism. If the U.S. administration wants to advance peace, it should be calling on Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas to end his agreement with Hamas and return to peace talks with Israel. Instead, it is enabling Abbas to believe that it is acceptable to form a government with a terror organization, Israeli officials said in a sharply worded statement made to the media. If these people are identified with Hamas, or are people with whom Hamas identifies and were appointed by Hamas, then these are Hamas representatives. In a Jerusalem Post editorial, the following observation analysis was made regarding the U.S. acceptance of a Palestinian unity government with Fatah and Hamas. The gloves are now off. The fight is on. The United States has now unequivocally designated Israel as the scapegoat and is meting out punishment for the disastrous outcome of the peace negotiations it initiated. The process began in March, when President Barack Obama publicly lambasted Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a brutal and offensive manner the day before their scheduled meeting in the United States. It climaxed last week when the United States reneged on its commitment to Israel, announcing that it would continue business as usual with the new Palestinian government after the merger with the genocidal Hamas, the terrorist organization which remains utterly committed to the destruction of Israel. The U.S. initiative was clearly designed to pave the way for Israel's further global isolation. It was immediately endorsed by the European Union, the United Nations, Britain, France, and of course China, Russia, and India, all of whom praised the Palestinian Unity Agreement as an important step toward Palestinian reconciliation. Prior to this, administration spokesmen have been campaigning behind the scenes to undermine the standing of Israel with the American public. That Israel had frozen settlement construction for 9 months and conceded to an abhorrent release of Palestinian terrorists with blood on their hands were facts that were simply ignored by the United States. Conversely, the Palestinian refusal to make a single concession or agree under any circumstances to an end of a conflict with Israel was rarely mentioned. Even following the announcement of the Palestinian-Hamas union, Secretary of State John Kerry continued blaming Israel, making bizarre predictions about it becoming an apartheid state, which followed his earlier warnings of an impending third intifada and international boycotts, all of which he subsequently retracted. Next week, we will look at the internal debate within Netanyahu's government regarding what should be the proper action that Israel should take going forward. So that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you regarding the current status of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.